Chinese Diaspora organization's response to COVID-19. I start with introducing myself. My name is Katja Levy, and I'm a very fresh associate professor in political science with a focus on China and East Asia in Norway at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, where I am now. You can maybe see that it's getting dark very quickly now here. I have studied China studies for a master's degree and did my PhD in political science. And since then, except from working outside of academia for a while, I have been doing research on topics, among others, on third sector issues in China. I've written a book about foundations in China. My main, I'm an area researcher. So I'm very specialized in China, and I'm trying to do my best to be equally good in political science from the disciplinary science side, but this is always something area researchers have a little problem with. So I just want to warn you that my main perspective is on the comparative political perception and on the China side. But since I was here or not here, but in Manchester, so to speak, from September 2020 to this September, I was not always there, but I was based in Manchester at the Manchester China Institute, and I had a project there. I was a research fellow for 2 years, and I had this project. So the whole project was about volunteering in the UK and China, and I still ask questions like, what are the similarities and what are the differences of volunteering in both countries? How can volunteering be fostered in the two countries? And you might wonder why on earth would someone think of comparing the UK, the birthplace, so to speak, of the third sector, and China, who has many traditions similar, but is definitely not the birthplace of volunteering in the Western sense. And my argument is that comparative approach with very different cases can be sometimes enlightening about the big questions and help us to generalize some ideas that we find in our research. This is why I usually compare things with China and try to generalize from there. In this main project, I made 4 case studies, and I'm still working on some of them, but one is finished, and this is the first one, the Chinese volunteers in the UK. The other 3 case studies are about Chinese volunteers in China. I did some interviews over Zoom with them this time, and British volunteers in China also over Zoom, and I met British volunteers in the UK as well, who have nothing to do with China. The whole project, I must say, was funded by Jerry Young, who is, you might know him, he's a member of the Chinese community in Manchester as well. And he was interested in how the two countries compare in regard to volunteering. And this paid my 2 years as a research fellow. But of course, he didn't give me any, he didn't ask me for a certain result, but I could just do my research and come up with what I thought was correct. So this is my my case study here. And because I published, or I'm trying to publish this case study at the moment, I submitted it to a journal. I cannot just publish it as one part of the bigger project. So I asked a special question for this part of a part project or sub project, and this is like how Chinese diaspora organizations responded to COVID and how the cooperation with a city council in Manchester went. So why is it interesting or even relevant to think about what the Chinese volunteering did in this very difficult time of the pandemic? I think to look at the Chinese community is of special interest because the Chinese had a very early knowledge about the pandemic because they still have connections to many of them have still connections to mainland China and to Asia, where the pandemic broke out, and they saw how deadly it was, and what happened in the first city in lockdown in Wuhan. So the Chinese everywhere, not only in Manchester, but also in Manchester, were very conscious about the consequences and the ways of spreading of the illness. And they were the first to wear face masks, and they were the first to have face masks, facial masks. So it was for me, I think it was interesting to see how they managed during the pandemic and how the city council used their very useful knowledge from the perspective of collaborative governance, which I will come back to later. The second thing, a special thing about the Chinese groups is that they had some access to scarce equipment. I talked to some of the people who actually organized PPE and facial masks for NHS and for the city and for their community members. They were the only ones who had access because Europe and the UK practically had no access to any of these. They had outsourced it to China long ago. Another aspect which makes the Chinese group special, in my view, is that they suffered massive discrimination and harassment of as Chinese looking people in Manchester and elsewhere, of course, too. Because in the UK and in Europe and in the US, people were suddenly thought that Asians had brought the illness to their country, and they treated them accordingly, which was very unbearable, and there was lots of suffering actually among the Asians, not only the Chinese, but anyone who looks Asian. And then I think from the research perspective, I think it is interesting to see how ethnic communities participated in the so to speak, the fight against the pandemic, because it is a bit more difficult to get knowledge if you're not part of the ethnic community. It's not our daily topic to what they do, and it's also they are sometimes also very closed. If you in regards to the city council, the communication is maybe not as smooth as with other community groups. Although, of course, other community groups also have their own problems with communication with the governments of their municipality, of course. So that were the reasons why I wanted to look at this case. And I, because maybe all of you except Alex haven't studied the Chinese migration so much, so I will make a very brief overview, give you a very brief overview about Chinese migration abroad in general, and how they came to Manchester. So in the 19th century, so before the 19th century, China was a rather closed up. It considered itself as the center of the universe or the earth, and people who wanted to have trade or relate to China would rather come to China than that Chinese actually went abroad. But in the 19th century, everything changed because the English and Europeans and the US started to enter China, and the traditional way of government broke down slowly at the end of the 19th century, and the Chinese there was a lot of reform going on, and economically there were lots of problems. So people looked for ways to make their life outside of China and also learn from from other countries. So there were many reasons why Chinese migrated to other countries within Asia, but also to the US, for example, to build the railways there in the US and Canada, or to Japan to study the political system there, and also to Europe and the US to study their governments, their education systems, to see what could be useful for China's reforms. And in the 20th century, the migration went on, but for different reasons. There were several big changes. One was in 1911 when the Republic was founded, and in 1949 when the People's Republic was founded, and in the 1960s during the Cultural Revolution, in 1989 when the democracy movement was forcefully ended, and all these, and also in the 1990s, when Hong Kong was returned, the crown colony was returned to China. This was also a reason for lots of Hong Kongers leaving China and Hong Kong. So there were different reasons: political reasons, economic reasons, education and business reasons, and some of the Chinese came to the UK and to Manchester as well. And Manchester is also near to Liverpool. Liverpool transported lots of workers to the US. So this is also like the late consequences of Liverpool to be a Chinese hotspot. So it's the proximity also is a reason for many Chinese being in Manchester. And the Chinese have in a long tradition of whenever they went outside of China, they would meet their fellow villagers or the people from the same cities or towns where they come from, and helped each other, and they formed different groups that were based on their common home or their place of origin, rather than some common goal like our associations or something. So these organizations were called Hulguan, and they form the origin of the social organizations in a way of Chinese in countries outside China. The people that I met in Manchester are basically first generation migrants, and they are very different from second generation migrants. The people who have studied migrants among you know that there's a big difference between the generations of all kinds of migrants, not only Chinese, because the first ones, they still are very connected to their home country, while the second generation is mostly already very integrated, has already gone through the education system, and has lived their whole life in the new country. So their way of looking at things are very, very different. So I think that's also kind of important, that my interview partners were all personally came from China or Hong Kong. Yeah, mostly China. So the Chinese community, I have already said a little bit about them. It's actually very big. If you look at statistics, you see that Manchester has the second highest Chinese population in the UK, after London. And the community is made up of mainland Chinese, Hong Kongese, and Singapore Chinese, and also other Southeast Asian Chinese, original Chinese, like from Malaysia. And these groups have very different upbringings, cultures, languages. So this is also some challenge for someone who wants to research the Chinese in, I make some side quotation marks here, who wants to study the Chinese. They are not a homogeneous group, and they have their very different political outlooks and speak different languages, as I said. And so it's not so easy to communicate with them. You cannot do it similar with each one. So from the history point of view, you also have some migrants coming already in the 19th century. Mostly, maybe you know that in the laundry business, and then in the 50s and 60s, there was another big wave after the founding of the People's Republic. That is no coincidence, but it has something to do with people not wanting to live under the communist rule, of course. That then the restaurant business starts, and Manchester is full of Chinese restaurants, of course. And in the 1960s, we have another push factor, the Cultural Revolution. Then at the end of the 1990s, we have the return of Hong Kong and Macau to the People's Republic of China, and people leaving Hong Kong again. And also very recently, and during the pandemic, we have another wave of many Hong Kongese coming to the UK because they have easier access to residence permits, at least for a while, as a former crown colony, and because the reason for leaving Hong Kong was, of course, the democracy movement and the clampdown of it in 2020. Today we have something like 30,000 ethnic Chinese in the city, and 9,000 students. I'm not very sure if the 9,000 students are part of the 30,000. This isn't very clear, and it is also it's not very clear, or it's not easy to find statistics at all, because as you probably know better than I do, the British statistics usually speak of Asians in general and not make a difference between Indians, Pakistani, Chinese, or whatever other Asian groups. So these numbers, it's a bit difficult to find them. So so my starting point was a combination of two theoretical outlooks. One is collaborative governance in crisis, and the other one was the social capital theory. So I thought the pandemic is definitely a crisis. If you take the definition by Parker, a situation or event that threatens core values and necessitates urgent action in the face of uncertainty. This is all met perfectly with the pandemic. And on top of that, COVID-19 can also be framed as a wicked problem, which is characterized by incomplete or contradictory information. We all lived through this phase, quickly changing environment and complex interdependencies. Decision-making takes place under conditions of great uncertainty, and immense time pressure. So this is the point of view of the government. So they have to do they have to somehow come up with solutions for the many problems that the pandemic poses. You have to separate the ill from the healthy. You have to protect the weak, and you have to treat the ill. You have to keep the schools open or not. You have to protect the old aged persons. You have to get make sure that the daily operations of the governments are still running, although everybody is ill, and so on and so on. All this, but this is under the very situation that everything is uncertain, changes very quickly, and you have to make decisions that can be wrong under high pressure, and can the consequence can be lots of dead people actually. And the idea of collaborative governance is that these are processes and structures of public policy decision making and management that engage people constructively across the boundaries of public agencies, levels of government, and or public, private, and civic spheres in order to carry out public purpose that could not otherwise be accomplished. So the idea is that the government, the local government or the city council or wherever you are, cooperates with different levels of the society and the government and public and private actors to solve problems better than it would do on its own, the government. And then we have social capital theory. There's a lot of literature about social capital, of course, and I take a very broad approach to it. That is, social capital refers to resources accumulated through certain behaviors, always associated with groups. So the idea is that if you engage in a group, you learn certain skills that actually help you to be able to be a part of the of society, and that keeps society together. And these skills you can only learn in the group. So and then we have of course some literature about collaborative governance that finds that if you really want government to cooperate with societal groups, with private actors, this has a lot of transaction costs. You can imagine some of you are activists or you are active in your own group, and you know that communication takes time. And there are lots of opinions in the group, and if you want to make quick decisions and find precise, quick solutions to big problems, that can be very time-consuming and even cost money. And if you are in a situation that of a crisis, it seems obvious that you don't have the time and the money to spend with discussions with social groups. So there's also some discussion about how to solve this transaction cost problem. And research has found that if there's a lot of social capital, so if people have already accumulated skills to work together and to coordinate each other, and if they have built trust among themselves and between the government, the local government levels, and the organization. And on top of it, if there are certain network facilitators who keep the two different sides together, then collaborative governance in crisis can work. So I wanted to see how this all played out in reality during the COVID crisis. And I did this or first of all, I've formulated out of this theoretical research that other people have done, or the research that other people have done, I formulated 3 propositions. I first tell you those. So the experience of working in a social group, like building social capital, facilitates joint collaborative efforts by the local government and the social organizations. And the second one is longer experiences of collaboration between local government and social organizations helps trust building and thereby supplement social capital in facilitating collaborative efforts. So the first one is more about the individual experience of collaboration, and the second one is more about the traditions of working together and building trust. And the third one is about this facilitator role. A formal facilitation structure can enhance collaborative governance efforts to mitigate the direct and indirect effects of the pandemic. So this is my 3 starting points, and then I looked at the Chinese community during the pandemic in Manchester, and wanted to find out how this worked here, if this is only theory or if it really worked out. So and then I in 21 and 2020 I conducted 10 very long interviews with Chinese participants. To find the Chinese participants, I first made a big desktop research on all the organizations in China, and I came up with a very long list of some 60 organizations or something. But then when I tried to contact them, some appeared to not really exist. Some of them had double entries in the internet, so there were actually one organization, and then others didn't want to talk to me, so I started with a few, and they introduced me to more groups, what we call snowball sampling. And so I combined this, the recommendations, with what I thought would be a fairly representative distribution of kinds of groups. I took this, my first long list, as a guideline. I took a qualitative approach. That means I talked to the individuals, and I was especially interested to see their point of view, so the bottom up point of view, so to speak, of possible or not possible collaboration with the local government. And just to make sure, I know, and this is very important, the results cannot be representative for beyond the group of the 10 groups that I interviewed. But because I did fairly deeply research on the different kinds of groups in Manchester, I'm sure that the groups themselves are pretty representative of the groups in Manchester, the Chinese groups in Manchester. So it's a very small area where I think generalization is limited but possible. Yeah. So these are my groups. I deal with them and I won't name the names of the people that I talk to, and not the names of the organizations, because it's they have there's something popping up in Norwegian here. I don't know what that means, but anyway. So I don't name them because they know each other among themselves. So I try to describe them in a way that they are not identified directly. I have two students organizations actually here, number 8 and number 1. One religious organization, one community organization, and 2 independent volunteers, 2 Chinese language and martial arts schools, a business organization, and a health organization. So the conversations that I have showed that I had showed very clearly that that the organizations had a supplementary role in the pandemic. The primary challenge of the pandemic was, of course, a health threat, and that had to be dealt with by the city council and the NHS. But the social organizations, they focused on all the different things that had to be done that were left out by the city council and the NHS, such as mental health issues, helping with loneliness, isolation. Domestic violence was a big topic also among the Chinese groups. Logistics issues such as buying food during self-isolating, acquiring facial masks, medicines, managing visits to the hospital or general practitioner and getting help with translation. Many of the Hong Kongese old ladies in Manchester had never met a general practitioner before and had no chance to go there because they couldn't communicate with them. People helped, the groups helped with this, for example, during such visits, and getting individual care if someone was ill and alone. And the social organizations themselves had to cope with social distancing and less funds, like all the other social organizations everywhere else too. But they had their own problems too, but they wanted to help their community, of course. And then on top of that, there was this additional influx from Hong Kong during the pandemic. I have to cough, wait a second. Okay. So this is the first thing. So there was this supplementary role. And then I had in my proposition, I had already taken from earlier research that social capital and trust and facilitating structures could be helpful in such a crisis situation. So I asked the groups about their relations to the city council, and they had very different and varying relations to the to the city council in general. But all of them had no good channels of collaboration before they had not established collaboration channels before the crisis, and that made collaboration during the crisis rather difficult. But just to give you some examples, the city council actually approached some organizations, but not always the right ones, but they tried to ask Chinese organizations to help with finding facial masks on the world market and buy them for the city. And but then within the community, other organizations had to actually do this business because some were better equipped with relations and the right information than others. But this was, but there could have been done much more about the facial, all the equipment, and also actually the knowledge about the illness. Also some insights from Chinese medicine could have been used better if there would have been an interest in it. And the second point is the relationship with the Chinese organizations and between the Chinese organizations and the municipal administration lacked trust, which made collaboration in times of crisis extremely difficult. Because of the demand, the requirement that you have to do quick decisions and need smooth cooperation and not much discussion. And there were very different problems mentioned in the interviews. There was also the topic of discrimination and of unfair treatment between different ethnic minorities in Manchester, and people didn't know if they could trust the Chinese groups and vice versa. So there was obviously a big lack of trust. In my article, I have lots of citations about that, but I think we don't have time to read out all the citations. So, and the third point was that some of the negative collaboration experiences described by the interviewees could be solved by facilitating structures, such as a long-term contact person in the local administration. That was mentioned by almost all of the groups. I mean, the group was not that big, the 10 interviewees, but they were all of the opinion that they don't really know whom to speak to in the administration, and that there's also sometimes people circulate in the administration and then the contact is lost forever, and there's no way of regular communication to get to know each other and to know each other's strengths that could be tapped into in a situation like a crisis. So this was all could all be found in the interviews. And I also found that a lot of quality was dependent. Quality of the relation between the social organizations and government was dependent on the attitude or the personality of the leaders of the organization or the individual persons that I talked to. There were sometimes first of all, there was the question whether there was an interest in the relation with a city government or not. So we have groups who actually have no relations with the city council and have no interest to have any with them. For example, the one of the student groups and one of the business groups did not see any value in cooperating with local administration. And then other groups had like a few connections with the city council just to keep channels slightly open, but would not turn to the government for help or for to support the government or to ask for help. And then there were others who said, yeah, I don't have any relations with the government, but I would like to. I know a lot, I could have helped them, but I don't know whom to talk to. They didn't ask me. I don't know what to do, but it would have been better if I had connections with the government. And then some organizations had collaborations actually ongoing, but found them lacking quality. And then very few, only 2 organizations had regular and intensive collaboration and consulting relationship with a city council. But this was also only in certain times, but not on the long run. But they themselves put a lot of effort in keeping this network going, or keep this open, these channels open. So I made a little typology, which of course needs verification with a bigger study, but I called them the self-sufficient, who do not care about connections with the government, the pragmatists who keep channels open just in case, but don't really put much effort in it, the helpless ones who would like to have more contact with the government but cannot, the bad negotiators who feel that they are that they give a lot but don't get anything back, or it's a very unsatisfying connection with the local administration, and then the networkers who put a lot of effort in keeping the channels open and are quite successful with it in the end. So to conclude this little case studies, the Chinese organizations played an important part in the Manchester in the measures against the pandemic and its consequences, and they were supplementary to what the city administration did. But there's no tested and trusted channel between the city council and the ethnic group of the Chinese that could be tapped into and used for quick and efficient cooperation in such a crisis. And maybe the little typology that I made in the end of the different types of organizations and their relations to the government can help to establish such channels in the future, like different treatments for different types maybe would be necessary. So I stop here. Thank you for listening to me, and we can have a little discussion now about this.